that same central core. Most significantly, Welsing argues that the core aspects of anxiety, alienation, and narcissism in Western civilization and culture is driven by their minority status, surrounded globally by a black, brown, red, yellow global majority, and with the white global collective remaining genetically recessive to the black, red, and yellow global majority, and a continuous fear of white annihilation by a global majority of genetic dominance. Fears of isolation, abandonment, and genetic annihilation remain at the core of an ambivalent Western civilization whose prime directive is the assurance of white genetic survival by subjugation and control and the system of white supremacy. She points out that behind Western narcissism, concepts of white supremacy and white grandiosity, there lies the insecurity and of inadequacy, inferiority, and vulnerability. As we are reminded by Dr. Welsing, long ago the Greeks were cautioned by the black oracle of Delphus, to know thyself, but that today the Western collective had failed in its task. The Western vision of self has been manifest by the resurrection of artificial concepts of black and white, and other constructs of the European racial paradigm. As we are reminded by Fanon, the black man is not, nor is the white. Macy points out that the point of Fanon's exercise in socio-diagnostics is to demonstrate that there is no fact of blackness, nor by the same criterion whiteness, with both being a form of lived experience. In this context, it's important that we consider that the Bahamian and indeed wider Caribbean socio-legal landscape has acquired importance. Land has acquired importance as a symbol of freedom and independence. However, for many of the descendants of enslaved Africans, it has also acquired crucial significance as a symbol of family unity, cohesion, and survival in the racial, gender, and class stratification in the region. Nevertheless, the denial of recognition to the living customary folklore of generation property by the constraints of the rule against perpetuities, in essence excludes black people from full expression of their cultural lives and their economic and political empowerment. More crucial is that the Bahamian legal system has mirrored this ambivalence, with many Bahamian jurists, legal practitioners, and academics failing to recognize the customary legal practice of generation property, which continues to survive, in some instances outside the ambit of the official legal system, and in other instances adapting to the intricacies of the official legal system by the fictionalized application of the legal system's quieting of titles act, obtaining perfected legal titles from courts which were to a large extent unaware or ignorant about the concept of generation property, and which generally ignore the existence of the generational property arrangement of land tenure during the relevant periods of limitation. It's been pointed out that under African customary law, land belongs to one's ancestors and to future generations as much, if not more, than the living. As such, in addition to cementing the essence of lineage and familial bonds, traditional African legal norms relating to land tenure ensured distributive justice and sustainable development for the African people. This underscores the ethos of generation property in the Bahamas and is reflective of a sacred and morally unbreakable bond between family and land. Nicolette Bethel indicates that generation property is imperfectly understood and is extremely valuable Bahamian resource. She asserts that it represents power and the foundation and core of independent spirit of Bahamian identity, with many of the southern islands consisting of settlements that bear the names of families, generally indicating the existence of generation property. The original intent of family cohesion and independence, which drives the concept, has been disrupted by 20th century migratory patterns created by urbanization, posing a critical challenge for the 21st century, as most of the population is now concentrated in Nassau and Freeport, with many cash-poor, land-rich generational property descendants not living on the land, with the majority of Bahamians living in New Providence and Grand Bahama, and their inheritance often becoming a burden, source of strife, and not the valuable resource that the ancestors intended it to be. Excuse me. Bethel argues that the failure here is not the institution of generation property, but a failure on the part of the Bahamian people who have lacked imagination, having been schooled by years of living in a world that regards land as a resource to generate cash, and where any other use is seen as worthless. And this has led to a denigration of the custom and the primacy of private land, which can be bought and sold, prohibiting Bahamians from grappling seriously with the custom. As I have recently indicated, the official legal system's law of real property focus on alienation of land, individual ownership, and patterns of land grants, coupled with a paradigm of marriage characterized by patriarchal monogamous cohabitation, disrupted the sustainable family cohesion and equilibrium of diaspora and Africans, and ensured an inevitable conflict with the customary living law of generation property. The confluence of race, class, gender in the daily lived experiences of African descendants and the official legal system was essential in this process. It is in this context that we must view with concern and skepticism the Western academic view that African land tenure systems are unsatisfactory and hindering full economic use of the land. There is some indication that here in the Bahamas, the official state law is finally giving consideration to the concept of generation property. In 2006, a committee chaired by Member of Parliament, Attorney Philip Brave Davis, was appointed by the House of Assembly to resolve issues relating to generational property. However, despite holding several meetings, the committee died without making any report, as so many of these committees seem to do, when the House was prorogued in 2006. Simonet points out that under a land use policy administration project, partly funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, a team of consultants attached to the Office of the Prime Minister has been working with the Department of Lands and Surveys to resolve all issues related to land, whether private, government, or crown. In this regard, recently the Bahamian government introduced proposed legislation, the Land Adjudication Bill, purportedly to normalize and regulate generational properties. In a recent Eugene Lepuch Law School Emoja lecture discussing the legislation, the Honorable Byron Woodside, Minister of State for Lands and Local Government, indicated the grant of new land titles would provide a forum for families to petition an adjudication officer to hear the claim and make a decision, which would allow them to be awarded a certificate of 1 acre and 1 acre only of land that would be marketable. However, the proposed legislation, rather than clearing up legal anomalies surrounding generation property, further aggravates the plight of its practitioners and obfuscates their legal realities. This is evident when considered that, as advised by Attorney Constance Delancey in a scathing critique of the legislation in the same Emoja lecture, under Section 2, the interpretation section, interest in land means any right or interest in or over land which is capable of being registered. As generation property interests are not and have never been recognized by the official legal system, then clearly they're excluded from by this definition from the ambit of the legislation. This exposes a failure of Bahamian legislatures as the rest of the Bahamian official legal system to fully appreciate and understand the intricacies of the customary legal concept of generation property land tenure. This failure to come to terms with the lived realities of Black Bahamians expressed through their traditional customary laws and unofficial legal concepts demonstrates a major dilemma for Black people in their interaction with the official legal system as recipients of the exercise of judicial power. This dynamic has reinforced the colonial policy of land grants, placing the majority of Bahamian arable land in the hands of the slave-holding white plantocracy and cementing the white oligarchic control of the economy, legal system, and social order of Bahamian society. The Bahamian racial equation invariably has resulted in a largely landless, disenfranchised, and disempowered Black community.